welcome to the strange and mysterious Qwest. My name is Jeannie, and I'm your host for this channel. Today I have a true story for you, and it's called The Mystery of the Dancing Plague of 1518. I think you'll find it very interesting. In the summer of 1518, a woman emerged from her house in the French town of Strasbourg and started dancing. Within a week, hundreds had joined her and started dancing. They danced day and night, seemingly oblivious to the fact that they were dancing the skin right off their feet. Many danced until they collapsed. Some may have even died. What on earth was going on? The 1518 dancing plague of Strasbourg was just one of many spontaneous outbreaks of dancing that occurred throughout Europe from the 7th to the 17th century. The history books are full of accounts of large groups of people breaking into dance. One of the earliest known cases occurred in the French town of Bourbourg in the 1020th year, where a Christmas Eve service was ruined by a group of peasants who suddenly jumping up and singing and dancing for no apparent reason. In 1237, there was another outbreak in German town of Erfurt. On this occasion, a large group of children took it upon themselves to leap and dance the 20 miles to the nearby town of Arnstadt, much to the bafflement of the residents of both towns. Many believe this was the origin of the Pied Piper story of Hamlet that he wrote. The outbreaks continued to pick up pace throughout the 13th century. The 14th century saw further outbreaks of dancing mania, by far the biggest being in the German town of Aachen in Germany. In 1374, that spread like wildfire across the country, reaching as far as Italy and Luxembourg. The following 2 years saw outbreaks occur in France, Germany, and the Netherlands. Dancing mania hit the town of Augsburg in 1381, and in 1428, the plague reached Switzerland with outbreaks throughout the country that claimed the life of a monk. The plague of 1518 was one of the biggest outbreaks ever recorded, and its cause has been debated for centuries. As the mania took hold, the leaders of Strasbourg turned to the city's doctors for a cause of the outbreak. Medicine was still very much in its infancy. They relied on using leeches and carrying around a lucky rabbit foot to ward off the plague. At this point in history, which explains why the doctors confidentially diagnosed this as being overheated blood in the brain. Overheated blood in the brains of the dancers. It was exceptionally hot summer, so it stood to reason that people's brains were boiling in their heads. After accompanying this diagnosis without question, the town's wealthy elites decided the best way to bring the plague to an end would be to encourage even more dancing. Presumably, so the people affected could dance off the excess heat inside their heads. To encourage this, the dancers were corralled in an area in the center of the city, and a stage was set up next to the horse market for them to get it out of their systems. Piper's drummers were brought in to encourage even more dancing, and big burly men were hired to prop up any exhausted dancers who dropped to the floor before the ferocious heat in their brains had properly boiled away. Surprisingly enough, this approach didn't work. With the dancers showing no signs of stopping, the city leaders arrived at the conclusion that they had made a big mistake by turning the center of the city, into an open-air dance hall. They decided that the plague was in fact caused by the classic one-size-fits-all explanation of the time. Of course, that would be the wrath of God. Bearing that in mind, a new approach was required. In a radical about-face, music and dancing was banned in favor of period of penance. The poor unfortunates affected by the plague didn't notice the change in policy and carried on dancing anyway on their crippled and bloody feet. With the ban being universally ignored, it was decided that the dancer should be taken to a nearby shrine dedicated to Saint Vitrus. At the time, Saint Vitrus was seen as a rather vengeful saint who was known to throw down a dancing curse on those who displeased him. At the time of the 1518 outbreak, Europe was deeply religious. Socially and most unfortunate events such as floods, famines, plagues were explained away as acts of divine intervention. To the modern mind, the idea that God or the curse of Saint Vitrus was the cause seems absurd. But to someone in the 16th century who very much believed that God and the saints directly intervened in their daily lives, this was not so ridiculous to them. God was everywhere and saw everything, and divine information was nothing to scoff at. In those more enlightened times, we dismissed the idea that these mass dancing events were the work of an angry God or a vengeful saint. So, what was the cause if it wasn't the work of a furious deity? One theory put forward to explain the phenomenon is a mass food poisoning. Rye was a staple cereal of the region where most of the dancing outbreaks occurred, and the species of mold known as ergot grows on rye. If consumed in sufficient volumes, ergot would cause strong hallucinations, not too unlike the drug LSD. So, did terrifying hallucinations cause the outbreak? It seems highly unlikely. Ergot is usually killed off quite quickly. The most plausible explanation is that the plague was caused by some form of mass hysteria. The people of the region already had it in their heads that God was displeased with them, and that made them very open to suggestions. These were people who had just come through several terrible years of disease and starvation that had left them highly stressed and incredibly superstitious. Seeing other people dancing and being told by those in charge that they were doing it because God wasn't happy with them could have led others to join in the fear that not doing so would make their lives even worse. Before long, 400 people were all suffering from what psychologists now call stress induced psychosis, a collective madness that spread through the population, causing them to dance until they collapsed. In this theory, it wasn't God making them do it so much as the fear of God. A powerful force in the mind of 16th century men that could drive him to do the most extreme things that today we would find very hard to understand. If dancing mania was caused by mass hysteria, it explains why it was so prevalent throughout the centuries and deprivation, and why it eventually died out as living conditions and medicine improved. Life would gradually get better for the people of the region, and outbreaks of mass dancing would die out completely in Europe by the 17th century. The dancing plague of 1518 was one of many such outbreaks that occurred for centuries and remains one of the most mysterious plagues of all times. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. And please remember to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. And I'll see you in the next one.